Okay, so it's the 23rd of November and lecture number 14. I wanted to talk to you today about a borrowed kettle. Actually, I want to talk about one theory, just for a little while, not a long lecture today. I want to talk about the cultural studies philosopher Slavoj Žižek. And his one book in particular, but his work in general, and the book I'm going to refer you to is not in any particular way his best, but it's pretty interesting, on war. And it strikes me that there are so many wars going on that we need to somehow address this critically always. And there's a sense in which that drops off when you start to get into what needs to be done, because in some ways it's too much. So first of all, there's a story from Žižek that he tells, a kind of joke, and it's one that Freud quotes, the theorist Sigmund Freud, the psychoanalyst. He quotes to describe the strange logic of dreams, but Žižek uses it differently. And in this joke, there are several contradictory, mutually exclusive answers to an accusation. And in a way, the dream work is the logic of that incompatibility of answers. Answers to the reproach, "Where's my kettle?" The friend returns the kettle, it's broken, and then you broke the kettle. The response is, "I never borrowed your kettle. I never borrowed a kettle from you, and I returned it to you unbroken, and it was already broken when I got it from you." So the impossibility of each of those answers existing in the same time is what Freud and then Žižek says is somehow the dream work. This is only possible in a dream that the same person could answer so illogically. "I never borrowed that kettle from you. I returned it to you in an unbroken state. It was broken when I got it from you." Now, the kettle in Žižek's book on Iraq is the metaphor, right? The broken kettle is, well, the story, the three incommensurable, contradictory answers are his commentary, is a metaphor for his commentary on the Iraq War in his book. It's almost like there are so many alibis for this war. This war. I mean, the Iraq War is ongoing, right? It's not over, but it's somehow in our public consciousness back in time. As are the other current wars on the planet. Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Sudan, Northwest Pakistan, Niger Delta, Congo, Balochistan, Palestine, Somalia, Mali, Ukraine, Turkey, and I haven't mentioned a number of small incursions or police actions. The old phrase the Americans had for the war in Vietnam. It wasn't a war, it was a police action, a policing action. So there are a few others. I mean, we could say the Philippines, Boko Haram in Africa, the Colombia Shining Path and the paramilitaries. Where else? Kashmir. Occasional squabbles between India and China in Tibet, Nepal, northwest frontier, and northeast states, and so on. Zizek's book was a useful reminder that war was the number one economy, trade activity on the planet. The business of war. He's a philosopher, Zizek, who operates through jokes quite often. He's inspired by psychoanalysis, by Sigmund Freud, and his book, Jokes and Their Relation to the Unconscious. Freud's argument is something like, when someone tells a joke to you or about you, usually it's a power game. Usually a joke at your expense, certainly, is a way of making an insult. But Zizek's not just about Freud. He certainly comes to Freud often, but he comes to Freud through Lacan, Jacques Lacan, the French psychoanalyst. And he's also a huge scholar of Hegel and Marx and Lenin a bit. And he really is a thinker of the dialectic. And the dialectic, in a way, is like that borrowed kettle story. It's a way to think through contradictory social situation. A way to criticize two alternative propositions and do something else. A strategy that perhaps he learned he learned it from Lenin, when Lenin said about two positions, both are worse, but he quotes Stalin as saying that. Stalin was copying from Lenin. I mean, Lenin's What Is to Be Done, a very famous text. It's a bit strange he would overlook this. Zizek, okay, his background, he's from Slovenia, former Czechoslovakia. Okay, so he grew up in socialism. And what the Czechs were famous for, and what he uses as a kind of cultural resource, was jokes about the party. The way in which opposition to the hegemony of the party, the political party in Czechoslovakia, was expressed through jokes about kind of Stalinism or Titoism, if you like. I mean, the famous joke about the security at the Stalinist work camp is that the authority, the party, heard from their secret agents that someone was stealing every day from the factory. And so they decided to search everyone who went in and out of the factory. And this one guy, every day he would come and he would be searched, pushing his wheelbarrow through the factory, and they'd search through his wheelbarrow and see that he had no goods that belonged to the factory. And, every day. And they said, we know he's the one. We know he's stealing something. But every time we search his wheelbarrow, we find nothing. The man was stealing wheelbarrows. The very thing, right? Not exactly, maybe it's in how you tell him that makes it funny, but Zizek's told this a couple of times in his books. He's very famous for recycling his own words, and sometimes other people's. He came to fame about 25 years ago with a book called Everything You Wanted to Know About Hitchcock, but Were Afraid to Ask Lacan, which is a kind of joke title as well. Everything, which plays on a Woody Allen movie, Everything You Wanted to Know About Sex. Maybe that's a phrase from something earlier as well. Afraid to Ask Lacan. Lacan is famously difficult to read as a psychoanalyst. Zizek, I think I've mentioned in another course about his problematic description of what happens with violence in incidents like the attack on the World Trade Centers and the London tube bombing, or the bombing in Barcelona or Bali and so on. He talks about these young terrorist groups of, and the French youth that were burning cars in the suburbs of Paris. Talks about them getting off on the spectacle of violence reported on the news. He has this concept, not his concept, but uses the concept of jouissance, a kind of sexual frisson you get excited by. In this case, seeing a burning car on the news that you or your mates have caused to happen in the suburbs. And Zizek wants to kind of theorize this. He talks about these youth going through this act of meaningless violence, almost as if the action of committing violence on a stage and getting seen is a marker of, like gaining social status, getting likes on Facebook or something, similar to that. He calls it a passage à l'acte, moving through the activity without really caring what the activity is in order to register that something was done. And that in a sense, these youth or the terrorists are mute and dumb. They have no message, they have no meaning, they are just violence for violence sake, which is something to debate, and I've debated it. The fact that the September 11 terrorists left no list of demands seems kind of insignificant, given that their demands were fairly obvious. Anti-world capitalism, stop the demonization of Islam, the wars. But Zizek's not just the theorist of violence, he's a regular commentator in so many of the main newspapers, and is invited to prominent talks at important institutions, Birkbeck College, the Architecture Institute, Tate Modern, and so on and so on. And he does op-eds and talks about cinema and has a show, a TV show about a documentary series on cinema. And he really has made his fame by being controversial. He takes some popular positions that sometimes they are, they're on the left. He identifies as a Marxist and in fact sometimes as a Stalinist, and admits so in a joking way. Jokingly describes himself as a Stalinist in a way that's almost like staging controversy. And there's a sense in which his far left positions swing around to almost be the same as the far right. His dialectical thinking is that he's gone so far to the left that he's come back around to the right, some people will say. He's a performer on stage. When he speaks, his hands are wild, going crazy. His hair's fairly wild. He's got these tics, facial expressions, which is quite, in a way, he's an exciting speaker because he's so animated, and because his little stories, his parables, tell us something that what usual stories cannot. What they tell us, what they cannot tell us. They're kind of controlled chaos stories. He's been described as being the Elvis of cultural studies. What does that mean, the Elvis of cultural studies? Beep, bop, loop, bop, bop, bum, boom. He's out there performing. But for him, the dialectic becomes almost like a staged performance. His commentary on Iraq is playing out a formula in some ways. First as tragedy, then as farce. A quote from the Marx's 18th Brumaire, Marx's commentary on a war. Marx's commentary on the 1848 uprising of the working class in Paris. And he repeats what the kind of positions that Marx took on that war. Zizek repeats, but without a political movement behind him. And the dialectic then is not grounded in the working class or any political movement. It's a kind of, like a game or like a mystical magic slate. Actually, very similar to Freud's magic writing slate. When you were kids, did you have these magic writing slates that my kids have now, where you write on a piece of plastic and then you slide something across and it disappears? You know what they're called? They're called magic writing slates. I don't know what they're called in Tibet. Anyone have one? You know what I mean? So it's a kind of toy, like a notebook, but like just a plastic toy. And you get a pen, you write on it, it's plastic, and then you slide the thing across or you lift the page up and put it back down and it's disappeared. You can see the outline a little bit of what was there, but it like wipes the slate clean. This is Freud's metaphor for the unconscious. He says we write during the day, we fill up the screen, and then we wipe it clean by going to sleep, but the residue is still there, a kind of hint of what's there. So this is how Zizek works as well, using this kind of metaphor and this kind of story to say this is how our arguments work, and then we wipe them clean and the residue is there. Or he sets up a debate and then says both are worse and moves on to something that we wouldn't perhaps always notice. So his argument about the Iraq war, I just wanted to put that in front of you, just because we need to have it in the mix, is that the real danger of the Iraq war is not that the Iraq war has supported Islamic State, and this is given fuel to the right, the populist right in Europe, who've demanded heavy-handed attack on Iraq. But that certain topics that it's thrown up, foreign threat. Right, the borrowed kettle story for Iraq is that, right, America went to war against Iraq with Australia, helping with England, with France and so on, because Iraq had something to do with Al-Qaeda and the bombing of September 11th. But they did not. The English, Tony Blair and so on, they showed with documents, a master's thesis from a guy in Cairo, that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and could, within 40 minutes, bomb Israel. That was plagiarized, faked, and false. They used the argument of weapons of mass destruction in the United Nations to declare that the kettle was not broken, or that it was already broken, or that it was never borrowed. These contradictory things, right? So the link between the right-wing populist positions of foreign threat, danger of immigrants, Islamic terrorism and so on, this is a whole ideological complex that Zizek wants to expose as conservative lies that have taken over both the right, but unfortunately also the left, the opposition, because they've been forced to argue on the same terms. So instead of challenging the very idea that there's too much immigration, the Labour Party, for example, in England, when the Tories started to talk about immigration, came out and said, no, we'll manage immigration better than you will. So they accepted the logic of the far right, the populist right. The negation of the negation in a perverted sense. He talks about it after Hegel. The second negation that he identifies is that then the decent centrist Democrats who reject the populist right then integrate their message into their own, the populist right message gets kind of tamed and re-spoken. So that the very ground on which the debate happens has been shifted to the right. And here's the real danger. The danger is not that it's a debate between fascism and its opposite, but between the far-right capitalists and the not quite so far-right capitalists. It's on the terrain of pro-capitalism. And the difference really is imperceptible. The difference between the Labour Party in England when it was in power as an arms trader and the Conservative Party. Here's a list of the major arms exporters in the world since 2006. 2008 to 12, 2013 to 17. So the two periods from Obama in power. You can see that the USA by far is the largest weapons exporter in the world. That's kind of incredible given their rhetoric of being the defenders of freedom and democracy, right? Second, Russia. Third, France. Germany, China. UK, sixth. I'm a bit surprised at that. The difference, the problem, the thing about gross statistics like this is that, and even though you see the black line, both USA, France, China and the UK have all increased their arms sales in the second period, 2013 to 2017, over 2008-12, increased, right? More war, more weapons. The thing about the UK's position there, it's the UK that mostly supplies the war zones. The US have kind of cornered the market in defensive capability, like Israel and places like that. Whereas the UK have been supplying Yemen, they've been supplying Bahrain, they've been supplying Indonesia, Philippines. They are providing weapons for some of the most vicious right-wing regimes. It's interesting to compare export and import of weapons. Number one exporter, United States, in billions of dollars this is. UK, second, across 1950 to 2017. Like taking a longer period, UK have been second in the world. And the largest import has been Saudi Arabia and Australia. Why does Australia need so many weapons? All right, I'm just going to skip through this and give it up. Guns for Saudi Arabia, bought from England, the Prime Minister of England getting an award from the Saudis, the Prince of England getting an award from the Saudis. Check him out. Prince Charles dressed as what we'd now call Arab terrorists. This is his usual garb, of course. He's a proper English hunting man with his mum. Let's not forget the US is the #1 exporter of weapons. Do they buy many? They're not on the list. India and China, way up there. And then Western sides. But the US, what the US do? How many of you have seen this picture? You know what this is? All right, this is a pop quiz. How many people have seen this picture before? Obama? Anyone? You've seen it. When they executed, allegedly, Osama bin Laden. Yeah. So here we have the then President Obama, his Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. Very rare for her not to have something to say. Who's this? Joe Biden, yes, the next President of the United States. In the room, he was deputy, he was vice president. Assembled military chiefs, strategists, and journalists. What would you ask? What question would you ask of this picture? What's your first question? If you have to think critically, remember the name of this course. What question would you ask of this picture? Anyone? Tell me what you can see. What can you see in the picture? Yeah.
I see that they are staring at something.
They're staring at something.
So I want to ask, what are they watching?
What are they watching? Yeah. So we do know what they're watching. We were told they're watching the live helmet cam of the Marine SEALs Team 6 as they stormed the compound in Abbottabad in Pakistan to kill Osama bin Laden. They're watching live video of the death of Osama bin Laden. Do you have a second question? Remember, this photograph was released to the press. My question is, they're watching live footage. They're watching Osama bin Laden, the #1 on the list of most wanted in America at that time for whatever it was, 12 years or something. Why don't we get to see what's on the screen? Why did we get a still photograph of them looking concerned, planning Hillary, her campaign to go for election next, right? She was lined up to be after Obama. Didn't happen, but you know. Why, if they are watching, then we've got the technology that you can go halfway around the world to Abbottabad at night undercover secret SEAL Team 6 operation, watching live video cam, and we just get a still photograph, not even of the main action. We don't even see what they're watching. It's very strange. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm saying, why do they think it was the best image to release? Why release this image? Why not show the dead body of Osama bin Laden? Like, you know, when Che Guevara was killed, they showed his body to prove that it was him. When Saddam Hussein was hung, they showed him being hung. Right? All right, the Americans didn't. It was the Iraqi government, the puppet government, but still. It's kind of bizarre that it was this still photograph. And what are they doing? What are they actually watching? They're watching a snuff film. They're watching someone be executed outside of the legal system. This person had not gone to court, had not gone through a trial, was not in America, right? And they're watching him be assassinated. A snuff film, basically. What we call a snuff film, you know, films in which people die. Worse than pornography. No, maybe, as bad as. No, worse than pornography. There's the borrowed kettle, right there. The borrowed kettle of media. Why the borrowed kettle? Because it's the contradiction, the lie that stops you even asking that question. Is it right that the President of the United States, the largest, greatest democracy ever, should participate in the assassination of citizens of another country without trial, without due recourse? And in fact, people afterwards outside chanted, USA, USA. Shocking, shocking, shocking. No wonder what happened next. No wonder. Oh, I can't tell you about the lies of him. I'm going to stop. Trump's lies. I can't even say that on screen.